Welcome to Lecture 24, where we will go over the concepts of community ecology. There are many different factors that can affect community structure, meaning the species that are present within a community and how they interact with each other. Community structure depends on the number, type, as well as relative abundance of the species that are present within an area. Some species may have integral roles, such as foundation species. These species are very large and abundant within the community. Their presence can affect community structure, and they may even provide habitat and food for other organisms. There are also many interactions that can occur between different species. Competition, predation, herbivory are all interactions that can affect the number of species and the particular species that are present within a system. And finally, disturbances may become very important in structuring a community. Factors or events such as marine heat waves, storms, human activity can also disturb a community. These disturbances can remove organisms or even add organisms. They may also alter resource availability, which can have pronounced effects on the remaining community structure. We will begin by examining the importance of species interactions. Species interactions occur when species within a community interact with each other. We term these interspecific interactions because they occur between species. These interactions can be classified as positive, negative, or neutral, depending on the benefit or harm that occurs with the species involved in the interaction. Common species interactions include competition, exploitation, and positive interactions. In competitive interactions, both species exhibit or experience a negative effect. In exploitation, one species experiences the benefit while the other is harmed, and in positive interactions, either both species benefit or one. There are many interactions occurring in this image to the right. Potential competition between herbivores and herbivory demonstrate the complexity of interactions that can occur within communities. We'll begin by exploring competition. In competitive interactions, both species suffer a negative impact, thus it can be classified as negative-negative. Competition typically occurs when two species use the same resource. This will limit the survival and reproduction of one or the other species. This is termed interspecific competition when it occurs between two different species. However, competition can also occur when individuals of the same species compete for a resource. This means individuals within a population will be competing against each other for resources. This is termed intraspecific competition. An example is found below. Lynx and foxes both compete for the same prey item, the snowshoe hare. This is a classic example of interspecific competition, whereas individual lynxes within the population will also compete against each other for prey. This would be classified as intraspecific competition. In some instances, the competition is so severe that competitive interactions will actually lead to the complete exclusion of one of the competitors from an area. This is called competitive exclusion. This is more common if one of the species has a selective advantage that makes it a better competitor. This advantage typically includes having a higher reproductive rate, or one species may have a better ability to acquire resources. Competitive exclusion is occurring right now in the UK. Red squirrels were considered to be the native species in that area. However, in the 1800s, the gray squirrel was introduced from North America. As a result, the red squirrel populations have declined dramatically, and in some instances, the red squirrel has been completely extirpated or removed from some areas. This is due to direct competition with the gray squirrel over similar shared resources. Goss was an important ecologist that studied competitive interactions. Specifically, he studied the growth of two paramecium in the lab, Paramecium caudatum and Paramecium aurelia. When these paramecium were grown individually, they exhibited logistic population growth, which meant that they increased their population until they reached a specific carrying capacity. However, when these species were grown together, Paramecium caudatum became extinct, meaning that Paramecium aurelia was a much better competitor, and this led to the competitive exclusion of caudatum whenever these two species were grown together. These observations were important in Goss developing his competitive exclusion principle. This principle states that two species that are similar and use the same resources cannot coexist within the same space. This brings us to our next important ecological concept to understand: what is a niche? An ecological niche exists as a set of abiotic and biotic resources or factors that an organism uses within its environment. These factors help define an organism's ecological role in the ecosystem, meaning how it interacts with its environment, where it's located, and how it interacts with other organisms in the system. Most organisms do coexist even though they have shared resources. Many organisms can coexist through what is termed resource partitioning. This means that organisms can avoid competitive interactions as well as being competitively excluded from areas by using resources either at different times or different locations. Within an ecological niche, we have to understand the difference between what is a fundamental niche and a realized niche. The fundamental niche includes the entire niche space that could potentially be occupied by a species. The realized niche is much smaller. This is the actual portion that is occupied by a species. Anole lizards in the Dominican Republic have different perch preferences. By perching in different parts of the tree and by feeding on the same resources but at different locations, these anole lizards have effectively reduced the level of competition that they experience. This allows them to survive even though they are feeding on the exact same resources. Another potential effect or consequence of competitive interactions is character displacement. In general, allopatric populations that share the same resource tend to be morphologically similar. This means that species that eat the same resource that are found in two different locations exhibit similarities in morphology due to that resource association. However, if we examine sympatric populations of species that consume the same resource, they tend to have morphological differences, which allows them to use different resources. This is referred to as the ghosts of competition past. This is because the present differences that are observed between two species are actually a result of competition in the past. These species have evolved mechanisms to decrease the competition in these sympatric areas. An example of this is looking at ground finches. Allopatric species of Geospiza fuliginosa and Geospiza fortis have similar beak depths, whereas their sympatric populations, shown in the last graph, or bottom graph, show complete divergence in their beak morphology, indicating that they have evolved to consume different resources or seeds. We're now going to move to understand exploitation. In exploitive interactions, one species will benefit through the consumption of another species, thus designating this as a plus-minus interaction. Exploitation interactions include predation, herbivory, and parasitism. Both predation and herbivory involve the consumption of another organism or plant. Sometimes these are considered to be similar interactions. In predation, an individual of a species will kill and consume the individual of another species. These pressures act on both the predator as well as the prey. As a result, natural selection commonly leads to adaptations in both predator and prey species. In general, predatory adaptations typically increases the predator's ability to find and consume prey items. These may include having sharper vision and very acute senses. Prey adaptations, on the other hand, typically increase the prey's ability to escape. These may include spines as well as herding behavior. Note that this mechanism was responsible for the Cambrian explosion that we examined earlier in the semester. Heat-sensing organs in vipers can dramatically aid in the ability to locate prey, thus making vipers a very stealth predator. By gathering in herds and schools, prey items may effectively lower their overall chance of predation. There are many different adaptations that can occur in the prey species. These can include mechanical defenses. Morphological features such as spines can make prey harder to consume, thus decreasing the level of predation that they experience. Chemical defenses, such as producing toxic or repellent compounds, can also be very effective. Coloration can also play a role in avoiding predation. Some species may be cryptic, meaning that their coloration acts as color camouflage to allow them to blend into their surroundings, effectively lowering their predation rate. If they can't be found, they can't be eaten. Aposematic coloration, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. In this instance, toxic organisms commonly advertise themselves in the environment. They typically have bright red, orange, or yellow coloration. This has been around for such a long evolutionary period that these organisms that have this coloration are commonly avoided by predators. Thus, by advertising themselves as being toxic, they can effectively lower their predation rate. Mimicry is also a way that prey items can avoid predation. Batesian mimicry occurs when a non-toxic organism will mimic a toxic organism. This can either be with aposematic coloration or in morphology, as we can see in the diagram below. The parrot snake is venomous, whereas the hawk moth larvae is not. However, the hawk moth larvae has evolved to look very similar to the parrot snake, thus avoiding predation in its environment. Mullerian mimicry, on the other hand, occurs when two toxic species resemble each other, as we can see in the yellow-jacket wasp and the cuckoo bee. They share similar coloration patterns as well as morphology. Prey species aren't the only species to utilize mimicry. Some predators can use mimicry to their advantage as well. The octopus that we can see on the left can mimic many other animals in the environment, thus effectively allowing it to catch more prey. There's an interesting interaction that occurs between predaceous and non-predaceous fireflies. Predaceous female fireflies of the Photurus species can mimic mating signals in order to trap and eat Photinus males. This may also allow them to avoid predation themselves. As they consume the males, they are also consuming defensive steroids that they accumulate in their own bodies. This has been shown in research to deter spider predators. Herbivory is another example of exploitation. In herbivory, an herbivore consumes part of a plant or algae. This usually harms but doesn't kill the plant. However, this is not always the case. There are extensive cases of herbivory where the plant will be consumed entirely. Herbivores range from large animals to invertebrates. Many herbivores do show some specialized adaptations to be able to digest the food source or to feed on their herbivore. These adaptations can include the presence of grinding teeth or organs, digestive system adaptations to help extract nutrients, symbiotic relationship with bacteria that can break down the cellular wall, and sensors that can help detect toxins that are produced in the plants they consume. Many plant or algal species also show adaptations, such as the production of toxic compounds or defensive compounds that help to either deter or harm the herbivore. The milkweed plant, for instance, produces cardenolide. This can produce cardiac arrest in the herbivores that consume them. However, the monarch butterfly has adapted to this. It utilizes milkweed as a primary food source. It will then sequester the toxins that it is consuming in order to make themselves toxic if consumed. In parasitism, one individual, termed the parasite, will obtain nutrition from the host species. The host is either harmed or killed by this interaction. Endoparasites live internal to the host, while ectoparasites live on the external surface. Many parasites have very complex life cycles that may involve multiple hosts. Heartworm disease, for instance, can kill mammals like dogs and cats if left untreated. Heartworm disease is caused by the parasitic worm Dirofilaria immitis. This is typically transmitted by mosquitoes, thus having two hosts, the mosquito as well as the infected animal. Parasites can directly or indirectly affect the survival, reproduction, and density of host populations. This example exhibits the important effect that parasites can have on populations. Extensive parasitism by ticks on moose can weaken the moose, making them more susceptible to predation by wolves, thus causing an overall decline in moose populations. This is commonly seen when tick populations are at all-time highs. Tick Ticks can directly affect the moose populations by weakening them and by potentially killing them, making them more susceptible to diseases, and indirectly by affecting the wolf populations. Positive interactions include interactions that benefit both or one of the organisms. It is important to note that neither organism is hurt by this interaction. Though there may be potential costs associated with this relationship for both organisms, there is an overall benefit experienced by the interaction. Mutualism is a plus-plus interaction because both interacting species benefit. Commensalism, on the other hand, is a plus zero because only one of the species benefits. Some mutualisms are so extensive that each species relies on each other for survival. This is the case between acacia trees and ants. Certain species of acacia trees provide nectar and nesting sites for stinging ants. The ants, on the other hand, provide protection from herbivory and pathogens and also remove and trim other vegetation in the area to allow for the acacia trees to dominate. Note that it may be costly to produce the nectar, but the overall benefit that is experienced far outweighs the costs associated with this interaction. Commensalism is very common in nature and can also be important in influencing the structure of ecological communities. These relationships and the benefit costs associated with them may change over time and may lead to the development of mutualistic relationships. Cattle egrets, for example, track the grazing bison and feed on the insects that disperse as the bison feeds in the tall grasses in a particular area. However, at times there might be a closer benefit or direct association. Bison can also benefit from the association if the egrets will physically remove ticks and other parasites from the bison. In addition, they may also experience a direct benefit if the egrets warn of approaching predators. Thus, we can see the relationship of these two organisms or these two species evolve over time.